Hello, good evening, everybody. So we're gonna start the lecture now about the Turkish drone war over Artsakh. Can you hear me? Is everything fine? I hope so. And I just want to make a few technical remarks about the translation. So the webinar will be held in English, and there's a translating channel that you can find in the bottom line. And so we have two translators, Sophie and Eva. I will introduce the speakers later. That was just a technical announcement. And now I will hand over to our comrade Laura, who will say a brief hello. So Laura von Wimmersberg.
Hallo und guten Abend in die Runde. Ich bin Laura von Wimmersberg. Ich bin die Moderatorin der Berliner Friedenskoordination. Und wir haben Ostern 2013 diese Drohnenkampagne gegründet, damit bei den Ostermärschen 2013 das erste Mal in der ganzen Bundesrepublik dazu gesprochen werden konnte. Ich begrüße euch herzlich und freue mich, dass ich teilnehmen darf. Das Interesse eurerseits an dieser Veranstaltung ist auch erfreulich und wird sicherlich dazu beitragen, dass die Thematik sich verbreitert. Und ich würde jetzt noch ein bisschen etwas zu den Drohnen sagen wollen.
Laura, einen Moment. I will just inform the audience. So this is the only part that will be held in German. A very brief announcement. I will translate it after she finished.
Jetzt loslegen?
Ja, mach weiter.
Ja. Der Weg von Drohnen zu autonomen, unbemannten Waffensystemen, die sich ihre Ziele selbst suchen, um sie auszuschalten, das ist vereinfacht ausgedrückt, ist mehr als eine bloße waffentechnische Weiterentwicklung. Sie gilt in Fachkreisen als die dritte militärtechnische Revolution, die dritte nach der Erfindung des Schießpulvers und der Atombombe. Diese alarmierende Tatsache ist aber im gesellschaftlichen Bewusstsein so gut wie nicht angekommen. Nur wenige können sich darunter Genaues vorstellen und auch in der Friedensbewegung ist das nicht weit verbreitet. Meinen besonderen Dank möchte ich darum an das Team richten, das diese Informations- und Diskussionsmöglichkeit zu genau einem richtigen Zeitpunkt initiiert hat und organisiert hat, weil in den nächsten Wochen und Monaten das Thema Drohnen im Bundestag und in der Regierung eine Rolle spielt. Wir hoffen durch die Veranstaltungen, die Proteste, die in der nächsten Zeit dazu stattfinden sollen, zur Eurodrohne und FCAS, dass wir sie mit dieser Veranstaltung stärken können und dass das Thema die dringend notwendige Aufmerksamkeit bekommt, die es bedarf. Ich würde mich freuen, wenn wir jetzt anfangen und freue mich auch auf viele gute Informationen.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. This brief introduction I will translate. Hello and good evening to all. So this was Laura von Wimmersberg. She's a very important, interesting peace activist. I welcome you on behalf of the drone campaign, which we launched before the Easter marches in 2013, which are like peace protests in Germany. Thank you for supporting the fight against digital warfare with the interested in this event, Germany and Europe at the crossroads regarding drones. And she continues, the path from drones to autonomous unmanned weapon system that seek out their own targets in order to take them out, put simply, is more than a mere weapons technology advancement. It is considered by experts to be the third military technology revolution, the third one after the invention of gunpowder and the atomic bomb. However, this alarming fact has hardly reached the public consciousness. Only a few people have a clear idea of what it means, not even in the peace movement. I would therefore like to express my special thanks to the team that initiated and organized this information and discussion opportunity at exactly the right time. And Laura continues, we hope that these events will strengthen the protest that will be held in the near future on the so-called Eurodrone and the future combat air system, and that the issue will receive the urgently needed attention. Thank you very much, Laura. I will now hand over to Joachim Stamm.
Yes, hello all together. My name is Joachim Schramm. I'm the managing director of the Alois Stoff Bildungswerk of the German Peace Society, the DFG-VK Northern Westphalia. Excuse my English, I'm not used so very well to speak English, but I think it will work. We are co-organizing co-organize which is preparing this series of discussion. I will welcome you also to this discussion series. Disarmament and arms limitation, the prevention of further armament, are essential elements of a sustainable peace policy. And therefore, the protest against the further development and procurement of military drones is one of the most important current political disputes. The protest includes information about the mode of action and the political consequences of drones in this case. Education and information as the basis for political debate are the core business of our educational organization, and so we are pleased that we can co-organize this great series with exciting speakers. We would also like to thank the organizations that financially support this series and make it possible in the first place. There are Brot für die Welt, the Katholischer Fonds, the Bertha von Suttner Foundation, and the DFG-VK Baden-Württemberg. But also the support in advertising for these events help us, and here I would like to mention Attack Germany, das Netzwerk Friedenskooperative, and the Internationale Versöhnungsbund. Now, enough of preambles. I'll hand you over to the tonight's moderator, Matthias Monroy.
Thank you very much, Joachim. For those who are not familiar with the organization he was naming, these are like bigger and smaller peace movements and foundations that gave us some money for the talk to organize it and for the translators. So I also want to welcome the translators, which is Sophie Kunze and Eva Karnowski. So they will translate into German, and as I said before, there must be a button in the bottom line for the translation channel. So let's get started. So I will introduce the speakers. So as they appear, we will start with Chris Cole. Chris is one of the founders of the initiative Drone Wars UK. And don't be mistaken by the name. They are not only covering UK, they are also giving out frequent reports about developments regarding drones and armed drones, of course. And so this is why we are very glad to have him here. And we would love to start with some, let's say more or less technical questions. So for those who are not too familiar with the issue, so what is an armed drone? So what do we mean by the term? And what is the different, so some people say combat drones. And then in the Artsakh war, we had also loitering munitions. So could you explain this briefly, perhaps?
Yes, surely. And thank you very much for having me. Delighted to be here. I think this is a very important point. When used in the military context, the term drone covers a vast array of different systems, from the US Predator and Reaper drone, which many people are familiar with, to small quadcopter drones, perhaps weaponized with improvised explosive devices, up to giant surveillance systems like the Global Hawk and the Zephyr, which can stay aloft in the air for 2 weeks or more, and down to the kind of single shot one-off systems, as you call loitering munitions, which are often described as kamikaze drones. So it's very important to be clear about what we're discussing. And in answer to your question, armed drones tend to cover systems like the Predator and the Reaper and the Bayraktar TB2 and the Chinese Wing Loon. These are sort of like traditional bomber aircraft, but without the pilot on board in the cockpit. Combat drones are those that are capable of engaging in air-to-air combat, like traditional fighter aircraft. They don't really exist at the moment. There are prototypes, and Turkey is also building a prototype. But designers insist that this is the way that we will be going, and insisting that once autonomy is properly factored in, they will be better, the combat drones, than piloted aircraft.
Thank you.
Sorry,
the loitering munition, of course.
Yeah, loitering munitions are a sort of cross between a missile and a drone. That is, they can be used like a one-off, like a missile, but they can loiter in the air and look for targets, either autonomously or guided through a video display by the operator. So there are lots of different types of drones.
So perhaps the loitering munition is a kind of throwaway drone, so one way usable. And thank you. You mentioned already the Bayraktar TB2. So this will play this drone will play a major role tonight. So we will get back to that, I guess, several times. So now you talked about armed drones, but what role are drones taking over if they are not armed? I mean, they also can mark targets, for example, for fighter jets or artillery.
Exactly, yes. Just the military unarmed drones, the surveillance drones, they can't launch strikes themselves, but they are very much involved in finding targets, either by operators using their cameras and verbally guiding in strikes through communicating GPS coordinates, for example, or by means of a laser designator on the surveillance drone, which paints the target using lasers, and a missile is then tuned in to that specific frequency of that laser and finds the target.
Yeah,
so
as we continue, sorry.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of like surveillance drones, some of them can stay in the air for an awful long time, but it depends how large they are, really, because the larger the drone, the more fuel they can carry and the more time they can stay in the air. So smaller surveillance drones can only stay in the air for a short time, but larger surveillance drones can be in the air for a long time, looking for what they call targets of opportunity, looking at the ground to launch strikes or to help other aircraft launch strikes.
This is interesting because we will now look a bit more closer to the Bayraktar TB2, this Turkish drone, and it's a very small drone, like compared to the big surveillance drones like Global Hawk or the Reaper Predator that you already mentioned. It's way smaller, but it can also stay in the air up to nearly 30 hours. So could you explain a bit the characteristics? And also, one of our theories is like, I mean, the name of the lecture is, we will talk about, is it a game changer? And so it's obviously much more affordable also for the armies because it's much cheaper than the drones that we knew before.
Yes, Bayraktar TB2 is smaller than the Predator and the Reaper, the US drones that we all know, but it is very capable. It's an armed drone, just the same, and is capable of launching strikes. And as you say, it can stay up in the air for some time. It's difficult to know exactly how, and that depends on exactly how much fuel and how far it travels. But the big difference between the Bayraktar and the Reaper and the Predator is that it's not controlled at the moment via satellite. So it has to stay within a certain range of the operator, around about 100 and 150 kilometers. So that's the big difference. But it also is cheaper because of that. And because it's smaller, it's also cheaper as well. So it's fitting a niche, if you like, and giving this kind of power, this capability to smaller countries.
I think this was an important point because most of us, when we started to learn about drone wars, we were like, okay, the pilots are sitting in the US in Nevada and they are steering the drones in Pakistan, which is happening. But the drone wars that Turkey is carrying out, they are steered from very close, actually. As you explained, the range of the Bayraktar drones is not more than 150 kilometers for the moment, because they don't have enough satellite technology. There is already a question in the chat that I will briefly answer, but it gives me the opportunity that there is a Q&A function, and I missed to mention that. So if you have any questions, please hand it over to us. So one of the questions is if these drones are equipped with facial recognition technology. So this might be upcoming in the future, but the drones we are talking about now, they are flying like 2 kilometers, 5 kilometers, up to 7 kilometers high. And of course, facial recognition technology would not work in that case. And it's also in military theaters, as I would perceive it, not necessary. But we might talk later about the smaller drones. So now we are talking really like aerial systems like airplanes, and there are also the small quadrocopters. So perhaps Chris, as a last question, can you a little bit talk about, you mentioned already the big global hawk, and then the Reaper Predator, and then the Bayraktar, and what comes below, so the smaller ones?
Yes, so there are a whole range of smaller drones that are primarily used for surveillance, but by the world's militaries. But the smaller drones are also now being armed by non-state actors, ISIS, the Houthis, lots of non-state groups are arming either drones that they are buying off the shelf, or they're being made in garages and workshops to create this kind of cross between a missile and a drone. So they are one-off, they're not reusable. And I think that's an important difference. The larger drones like Bayraktar and Predator and Reaper are reusable. They fly regularly, whereas the smaller drones, either what are called loitering munitions, but are sometimes called one-off kamikaze drones, are only used once, but can be armed, either jury-rigged, or as we call it in England, which is kind of, in a garage or a workshop, improvised.
Thank you very much. Chris Cole from Drone Wars UK. Now I would like to hand over to Kamaran Malo Osman from Iraq, and he's human rights observer for the Christian Peacemaker team in Iraqi Kurdistan, and we are very glad to have you here because you can explain a little bit more into detail. So how does it feel like a drone war from the ground, and perhaps a few words to explain your situation in Iraq. So under the pretext of persecuting the Kurdish PKK, like in the so-called counter-terrorism operations that the Turkish army is carrying out, they regularly attack villages in Iraq, very often with drones, not only with drones. President Erdogan is by that following the practice of the US, Great Britain and Israel, who do this since many years. So since 2 decades, they are using armed drones in Pakistan, for example, Afghanistan or Yemen, and attacking, like in so-called counter-terrorism operations, like also civilians. So when did these attacks in Iraq begin? And can you say a little bit about like the amount, the frequency? So who is targeted, and what about the victims?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. And thanks for your dedication to learn more about the Turkish drones and its impact on the civilian people. Actually, if you want to talk about the Turkish bombardments and Turkish drones bombardments in Iraqi Kurdistan, we have to go back to 1986, that for the first time Turkey artillery shelled the Kurdistan border regions. It was artillery shelling, and then in 90s Turkish started to using fighter jets in the bombing. And in 2000, after 2000, Turkey started to use the drones. I mean, the drones that they can only observe, and then the fighter jets can bomb it after that. So after 2007, the bombing by the fighter jets and F-16, it was happening continuously. And before the peace process in Turkey, from 2012 to 2015, Turkey didn't have a lot of power to bomb Iraqi Kurdistan. They were they could bomb, but it was not happening more often. Yeah, and in that time, before 2012, sometimes United States intelligence servants were helping them in spotting the targets. And I want to give you an example. In Roboske, in the end of 2011, U.S. intelligence service, they spotted an area for the Turkish fighter jets, and the F-16 of Turkey, they killed 34 civilian people, and then they said it was by a mistake. We didn't mean to kill these people, but they were not PKK or armed Kurdish people. They were just civilian people. So Turkey, we can say Turkey used the peace process opportunity to develop their ability or develop their manufacturing to build more drones. And after 2015, and we can say in the end of 2015, Turkey started to continuously bombing Iraqi Kurdistan border villages. And actually, since that time, from that time until now, more than 100 people, we can say 102 people have been killed by the Turkish drones, and 109 people, almost 109 people, have been injured by the Turkish drones. And if the frequently of the bombing, it depends on the time, and it depends on the operations that Turkey is holding. But I can give you an example. In the first week of March, just in 1 week, Turkey bombed 13 villages multiple times, only in 1 week. So some days they are bombing a lot of areas, some days there is not any bombing, but every week is like that, 13 to 14 times. We can say 13 to 14 villages are being targeted by Turkey. So we can say 2 times in a day, two villages in a day are targeted by the Turkish drones.
Chris explained us before that the Bayraktar drones, the Bayraktar TB2, cannot operate from in a very far range. So do you know where they start? So could you confirm that these military efforts are close to the border?
Yeah. So in the past, when the Turkish drones were spotting the targets, the fighter jets were flying from Diyarbakir city in Kurdish. It's a Kurdish city in Turkey. So they were getting their target, or they were getting the Kurdistan border regions in 15 minutes. But now it is completely changed, because most of the drones are flying inside of the Kurdistan, in the Turkish military bases inside of Kurdistan. We have Bamarne. I can show you on the map Bamarne. Okay, so I cannot share my screen. Okay, so Bamarne is a village that Turkish military base is established since 2006. So it is 30 kilometers far away from the Turkish borders, but most of the drones are flying from this military base. Then they will get their targets in a few minutes.
And as far as I know, for the first time last year, I think it was in August, Turkish military blew up 2 governmental officials from Iraq. So perhaps we have to underline this. We are talking about Turkish military carrying out military operations in Iraq, which is of course a violation of international law. But under the pretext to fight against the PKK. But in August, I think it was in August, they killed 2 high-ranking Iraqi government officials. So could you please explain this situation?
Yeah, actually, if we say that it's under the pretext of persecuting PKK, I think it is just an excuse for Turkey, because it's not right. If you are comparing the number of the casualties, civilian casualties, with the PKK members that have been killed, the civilian people have paid that cost, the cost of this war more than PKK and armed groups. Actually, this incident happened after Turkish defense ministry, they launched 2 military operations, Claw Eagle military operation and Claw Tiger military operations inside of KRG. So it happened in August of 2020. In that time, it was a demand from a lot of Kurdish parliamentarians in Iraqi parliament to have they asked the Iraqi central government to protect the sovereignty of Iraq and not let Turkey to enter anymore in the Kurdistan region. So Iraqi government they responded, and they made some new military bases between the PKK bases and the Turkish bases. So in that time, Iraqi government wanted to have like a talk, or they wanted to have a negotiation with the PKK fighters to talk about this area, because the bases were very close to each other. So these 2 high commander of Iraqi government, before they get their the place for the meeting, they have been targeted by the Turkish drones. So it was in purpose. It was not by mistake. It was
of course.
Yes, it was in purpose, and actually they were also Kurdish people. These 2 commanders, they were also Kurdish people. So Turkey, we can say that Turkey, they don't want to only target PKK fighters. It is just an excuse, but they wanted to target every civilian people in that area, and they want to invade this area actually.
Let me end this first round with one question. Are you aware that the Bayraktar TB2 drones that Turkey is using contains parts from like companies from all over the world, like from Canada or from Germany? Are you aware of that?
Actually, we are not expert in researching about that, but we have what we have discovered, that the Turkish drones are nothing without the help of German companies, because
of the shrapnels. No?
Yes, because of their munitions and warheads that they are providing to the drones. And in the past, in 2018, we had a meeting with the Canadian consulate that it was a shrapnel from an incident, from a bombardment. So we gave them this shrapnel, and we told them that you are helping Turkey with providing the aids, or providing the munition or sensors or optics for the drones. So they are just killing civilian people. That the last year Canadian government, they decided to stop export the aids, the military aids for the drones. So we are happy about that, but we can clearly say the Turkish drones are nothing without the help of the European countries and the Canadian government. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me complete your answer. You missed to mention that you went to the Canadian embassy and brought them the shrapnels from the attack. So even if the ammunition is more with the help from Germany, and Canada was providing like optical sensors and infrared sensors for the Bayraktar drone. And the interesting thing I found is, so Canada said they were gonna stop the export of this supply, and now you see in Turkish state-owned media or state corporate media, you see like, no, we are so independent and we are so proud on our technology that we have now our own sensors and optical stuff. You see that this is quite important to figure out who is the supplier of the drone, like international companies. But now I would love to hand over to Georg. He is from Armenia, and he also experienced the drone war on the ground, but in a very different role. So Georg, you were conscripted when the war started in end of September, 27th of September. After you were conscripted, you experienced the drone war on the battlefield. So you were obliged to fight on the side of the Armenian military. So how do you experience the drone war? I mean, obviously it was the first interstate war that was won with the help of drones. And yeah, can you explain a bit the effects or what happened there?
Of course. I'd just like to make one comment that I'd be careful not to call it an interstate war, because technically speaking, it wasn't a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It was more of an internal war between Nagorno-Karabakh, which is considered an autonomous region, and the Azerbaijani state. But to answer your question, well, I mean, look, just generally speaking, really, it's simply an unpleasant experience, because you essentially feel powerless. There's not much you can do. As someone who is a ground soldier, there's you can't shoot at it, whether you have an AK, whether you have a PK, even if you have an RPG at hand, unless the drone is flying very low, there's nothing you can do about it. And I'm maybe getting ahead of myself, but I can tell you that just in the same way, there's very little you can do once you become the target of a drone. We were told that if you can hear the whizzing sound that a drone makes once it essentially shoots itself down, you have somewhere between 5 to 7 seconds to get out of its way. Otherwise, you're dead.
Excuse me, now you're talking about the loitering munition?
Yes, this is specifically about the loitering munitions, because
perhaps you can portray a little bit. So you had the loitering drones, and you had the Bayraktar drones.
I mean, we really got the whole bunch. We had surveillance drones, we had attack drones, which are essentially drones that shoot rockets at you, and then we had what Chris explained to be the loitering munitions, or otherwise known as kamikaze drones, which essentially shoot themselves down at you and cause to explode because of the explosive charge that is attached to the head of the drone. So Armenia and the Armenian forces really experienced the whole bunch. And again, really, there's really nothing you can do about them unless you're shooting at them from a plane, from an aeroplane, or you're able to target them through artillery, which is really very, very difficult, if not impossible, because they are quick, they are highly maneuverable, and it makes them virtually impossible to shoot down. Unless, you'll remember that in one of our calls, I told you that there was this one strange, let me call it strange incident, because in the wake, just a couple of months before the what is now known as the Second Karabakh War happened, end of September, there were clashes between, this time, Armenia proper and Azerbaijan on the northeastern border of Armenia. And it was one of the first times that we saw the Azerbaijani forces use the Hermes 900 drone, which is a sort of super drone, supposed to be one of the most sophisticated drones in the market, Israeli produced. And one of our boys was able to shoot it down, I think either using an RPG. I think it was an RPG, which is not supposed to happen because these are highly maneuverable drones, and it should have been able to avoid it easily. But for some reason, if you've seen the footage, you know that for some reason, it was simply flying in a sort of very constant way in the air, which made it a very easy target for this young boy who ended up shooting it down using an RPG.
Yeah, to underline that, the Hermes 900, it's one of the largest drones, and it's also operated by Frontex, by the way, in the Mediterranean, of course, unarmed, and in that case, I think it was also unarmed.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that was interesting, like to see like the broad range of drones. So I read somewhere that one of those, if they attack the loitering munitions, they make a kind of infernal noise. Did you experience that?
Well, I mean, they make a noise both when they're in flight and when they essentially throw themselves down. So as I've explained in the past, usually when they're in the air, they make a sort of whizzing sound, like it's like a constant bzzz, and you can clearly hear it. And that's how, I mean, in the absence of any other technology to essentially as a ground troop to detect them, that was the only way for us to know that, okay, we need to move away and we need to find shelter, because we are clearly being surveilled by a drone. And the problem with the sound is that the sound doesn't allow you to understand what kind of drone you're being followed by. Whether it's a simple surveillance drone, which can't do you any harm, at least not by itself. And I'll explain why I say that in a minute. But the surveillance drone can't do you any harm by itself, because as the name suggests, it's simply a surveillance drone. So it's a drone with a camera and that's it. But it could just as easily be an attack drone, which is probably one of the worst ones, simply because there's no warning sign when it shoots its rocket. And the rocket travels so quickly because it's much lighter than the loitering munitions, which are heavier. And so it takes them a bit more time to get to their target. The rocket travels very quickly. And there, your chances of survival are close to none. Or whether you're being you're being followed by a kamikaze drone. I myself have been followed by, on one occasion, I'll give specific examples because I've been pursued by drones on more than one occasion during the war. But in one case, when we were being moved from one point to another in a truck, essentially, we were clearly followed by a surveillance drone because it didn't end up doing anything, neither to us nor to anyone in the vicinity. But there was this one incident in the night when we later understood that we were being pursued by a kamikaze drone, because while it made that hellish sort of whizzing sound, which by the way has been a source of PTSD among a lot of young men today in Armenia. It made that whizzing sound for about 20 minutes. And then it makes this sort of from a whizzing to a whizzing sound. So you can tell that it's shooting down. So it makes zzz, and it's a progressive sound. And that's why you know that you are in trouble. So what happened to us is that it clearly began to descend. And then probably the person who was operating it thousands of kilometers away decided that we weren't a worthy target. So went back up. It spent another 20 minutes in the air. And I remember clearly because we were in a shelter, and every few seconds we would pop our head out to make sure that, is it still there? And then eventually within 20 minutes, it ended up shooting itself down and exploding maybe a kilometer or two away from us.
Thank you very much for sharing this probably very heavy emotions. So before I have one last question to you, but I would like to answer a question from the chat. So there was the question, if we know the parts that Germany are producing for the Bayraktar TB2, and this is the rockets. So Germany granted export licenses for the company MBDA, which is basically a European company, but they have a branch in Germany, which is called TDW. And they exported like samples of small rockets. So the abbreviation is MAM, like they have to be kind of smaller than regular rockets. So they provided them samples, and which is, I guess, much more important, they supplied them with technology to produce them. So they explained them how to produce them on their own. Mm-hmm. So this is the German company MBDA or TDW. So the last question is, you know also a little bit about the effects that the drones did after the strikes, and you also explained before about when we had our meeting before about what the hospitals were explaining about the damages.
So I'll try to be brief about it. First of all, like any explosion, whether it's from an artillery shell, whether it's from a tank shell or any other sort of explosion, obviously, first of all, there are two things to be really afraid of. First is the wave, because even if the wave doesn't kill you, which it can, from internal bleeding and literally internally exploding your organs, including vital ones, it can throw you from a few meters to a few dozen meters in the air, and you have no guarantee that you're not going to hit a wall, a tree, or simply the ground, and it's not going to kill you. I'm a journalist, and I've had the opportunity to write an article about a rehab center here in Armenia, which is doing a fantastic job. It's called the Homeland Defenders Rehabilitation Center. And I got to interview a young man, 19 years old. And I would like to specify that, you know, a lot of the boys that I do choose my words carefully when I say boys, because these are kids aged 18 to 20 who've had to see the unseeable and the unforgettable. But coming back to the point, this boy was thrown several dozen meters in the air. He ended up fracturing both his hands, but he was one of the lucky ones because he actually survived. So that's number one. And then the number two, and probably the scarier of the two, are the shrapnels. Again, like any explosive device, the worst injuries are inflicted by the shrapnel. And I've had the opportunity to speak to a number of doctors, both local and foreign, many of them, you know, who have seen their fair share in their lives as surgeons and so on and so forth. And even they would tell me that, look, it's what we are seeing here is unprecedented. Because what it does is essentially it tears you up in the very literal sense of the word. I have very graphic images. I don't want to show them because I don't think it's a pleasant sight, obviously. But you get hit by everything from small shrapnel, which is borderline impossible to extract surgically, so it stays in the body, up to teared limbs, including multiple limbs. You get what is known in the medical field as multi-traumas. So it not only can tear off a limb and whatnot, but it can pierce an internal organ. It can tear open your skin. It's a horrible sight. Simply speaking, it's a horrible sight. And I think, and I'll stop there, but I think what really makes it most terrifying is that it's the immediacy of its effect, because it's an instant away. It's not like in the movies when you see people, it explodes and they have time to run away or jump or no, it's not true, because it's in one moment you're there standing and holding your post or fighting or whatever. The next you're in the air. A second later you're already in the air, or your limb is gone, or your head is gone, or you're dead. So I'll probably stop there for the moment.
Oh, thank you, Georg, to share again this emotion. Yeah, so perhaps some of you who are watching have seen the videos that the Azeri Defense Ministry was publishing on YouTube. So after each attack, we were seeing like the drone footage, and the drone wars always explained like very precise surgery operations. And thank you for sharing how these precise attacks look from the ground. So I will now hand over to Kamaran Otman. So also thank you very much that you can join the conversation. To Barus Samadov, excuse me, I mixed it up. Barus Samadov, he's a PhD student from Azerbaijan. We are very glad to have you here. And just for the first round, a few questions. So you were not in the country when the fighting started in 27th of September, but nevertheless, of course, you observed the war very intensively after it began. And you wrote an international call a few days after the war started, a call for peace. So that was actually, I was very glad to read this, so that there is a peace anti-war voice, and the letter received lots of attention in the German left, I would say, as far as I would see it. So could you a little bit explain the background of Turkey's support for the Azerbaijani invasion? So how did it develop, and yeah, what support did the Turkish army bring?
Thank you, Matthias, and thank you for organizing this this lecture. And it's really a vital topic to talk about drones and drone wars and the role of Turkey in both Nagorno-Karabakh and in conflicts in Iraq and Syria, in Lebanon. Talking about the war over Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh, we should start with the fact that I can start with the how the identity of Azerbaijan as a state has been built after the collapse of the Soviet Union. After the collapse of the Soviet identity, Soviet socialist identity, Azerbaijan was looking for a new identity, new nationalist identity, and Turkey has played the role of the so-called elder brother and so-called the leader of the Turkic nations, and Azerbaijan is seeing it as a elder brother basically. And this view is basically shared by both the government and by the opposition. So sometimes, I mean, mainstream opposition, of course. We are also in opposition, those who signed these petitions that you mentioned and this peace call. But I'm telling about the mainstream opposition, and sometimes even the opposition is even more radical, even more nationalistic in its views. I mean, ethnic nationalist, while the government is more like a state nationalist. So nevertheless, the main point is that to how Turkey, the relations between Turkey and Azerbaijan has been developing after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And basically it was relations of so-called brother countries, two states, one nation. It was a famous motto that has been articulated numerous times by both sides. And returning to drones, here I would first I would mention the fact that real peace negotiations, as I can say, it was really working during the late 90s, when both Azerbaijan and Armenian governments were more open, and I would say open-minded, and Azerbaijan was more democratic, and well, it was like hybrid regime, and I would say probably same in Armenia, and both sides were ready for talks. Actually, I'm saying both sides, but I should say also Nagorno-Karabakh as as a site. And Azerbaijan back to that times, Azerbaijan government, Azerbaijan civil society, they had meetings with the administration of Nagorno-Karabakh, with its government, with its civil society. But after, I would say, after that times, we observed the development of real fully-fledged authoritarianism in Azerbaijan, and things had been changed. So here we should back to April 2016, the so-called Six-Day War between Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh. And how is it? We should examine this, because the April War actually showed that both sides more or less are equal, and
in terms of military power, you mean?
Yeah,
no? Like
in terms
balanced.
of military, yeah, they are balanced, and unfortunately, both sides had like more or less same casualties. More than 100
but the
soldiers.
Azerbaijani military, they had already the drones, no? They already operated with the kamikaze drones.
Yes, but they were less developed, I would say, and they were less used compared to the last war. And actually, after April War, that 5 years, Azerbaijan and between during different clashes, during various clashes between Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh, the drones also were used, but only episodically. And during the last clashes in July of summer 2020, more or less same, but it was between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as Georg also mentioned. And also these clashes also showed that it's like more or less sides are balanced. And officially, Azerbaijan purchased the Bayraktar TB2 drones after June 2020, and it started its active usage during the war over Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yeah, that indicates also a little bit that probably they were not steered by Azerbaijani military, because in such a short time, you are probably not able to manage to train them. So probably also Turkish pilots were conducting the strikes.
Yeah, exactly. I also think so. Of course, we can't prove it, but logically we can assume that it is impossible to the Azerbaijani army or any army during this short time. But nevertheless, I would also mention that the Azerbaijani side was preparing itself to that war. So especially after July clashes in summer 2020, and there was a huge rally, popular rally, when ordinary people were just started demonstration, and they only demand was to start war and to take revenge. So of course it is disastrous, and as also Georg mentioned, how deadly these drones are.
Yes, so for us, may I precise a bit? For us, it's like in Germany, as we are struggling at the moment to prevent the arming of drones. And I find it very interesting, as you explained, like in the past, the powers were kind of balanced, and then the drone came. So do you think that Azerbaijan would have waged the war without the drones?
I wouldn't. I'm pretty sure that it would be impossible to win the war without drones for Azerbaijan. And a lot of videos are circulating on Facebook, on YouTube, how these drones work, and people were just sharing it. And of course, it is quite toxic how people just are watching and enjoying how the drones just destroying the enemy and killing the enemy, or I would say destroying the heavy artillery.
Yeah, so it was also a propaganda tool, no?
Yes, yeah, yeah, it was, of course, it was a propaganda tool. The aim was to show how powerful are Azerbaijan and Turkey, how powerful is our brotherhood, and how actually Azerbaijan wins the war, how powerful it is. So, of course, and for ordinary people who are who had this view, who have these views, these videos was like these were the how to say this, something to just to watch and enjoy. Of course, it just shows how growing up in this atmosphere, how it reflects the people's behavior.
Yeah, thank you very much. So propaganda was also, so for those of you who haven't seen the photo, but when the war was over after 6 weeks or a little bit more, there was a victory parade in Baku, and the Turkish military was present, of course, as well. Erdogan came himself, and they brought, I think, 2 drones, 2 Bayraktar TB2, or at least one. There is the photo, and it was paraded through the city, like the Turkish drone. That obviously was very important for the quick victory. Let me remind you, the audience, again, that there is the Q&A function. So if you want to have to add something or want us to answer your special questions, so just write them down. There is one comment, so from, obviously by the name, I would consider an Armenian person, and that explains the the drone war as an iron rain that was going down in Artsakh. What is the Armenian name for Nagorno-Karabakh. So thank you, Barus. I would come again back to Kamaran. Excuse me that I mixed up your names before. Yeah, you already explained a bit what the drones are doing to the people, and we also heard from Gevorg that the drones are terrorizing the society. So yeah, could you explain it a bit on behalf of Iraq? So how do the people suffer? Is it also this PTSD thing that you observe? You are a humanitarian observer, and it's kind of your work, no, to document that.
Actually, the Turkish bombardment in Iraqi Kurdistan caused a lot of a lot of impact and destruction on the people, and it is not only the people that they are killed because of the bombardment. It's actually since 2007, according some news, that more than 3,000 wild animals have been killed because of the bombardments, and 80% of the there is an area, the triangle, that the Turkish army and PKK, they have war in that area. 80% of the forest have been burned. It means 27 of the green zone in Iraqi Kurdistan have been burned because of that bombardments in Iraqi Kurdistan. Actually, these bombardments and this war caused a lot of things, and it means a lot for the Iraqi Kurdistan people, for the Kurdish people and Christian and the minority people as well. Because, for example, 500 villages are under the threat of being evacuated because of the bombings, and already 126 villages are completely evacuated, and a lot of students in that villages are deprived of education and schools. So Turkey is not only targeting people; it's also targeting the farming and the planting of the people and the livelihood of the people. Actually, during the Ba'athist regime in Iraqi Kurdistan, during the Saddam's regime, that they were in power before 1991 in Iraqi Kurdistan, people were just moving to the cities because the war between Peshmerga fighters and the Iraqi military forces were on the mountains. People were just moving to the cities. After the Kurdish uprising in 1991, Kurdish people had a hope to go back the villages and reconstruct the villages and build their normal life and keep their tradition and protect their norms in the villages. But that war between Turkey and PKK, it caused and it forced people to be displaced again under the Turkish military force hand, and it forced them to think of not staying in the villages anymore, because people cannot tend their animals in the villages. Their animals also have been targeted by the drones. They cannot farm, they cannot plant, and it makes people to not stay in the villages anymore.
As I mentioned, as a humanitarian observer, this is what you do every day, like you and your organization. You document the drone attacks to bring it to like public attention. Does this work? So who is listening to you?
Yeah, actually, what we are doing here is we try to be a bridge between civilian people who is being impacted by the drones and by this war, and the Iraqi government and the KRG government. We want to tell the KRG government and Iraqi government that they should compensate these people and do something for them, and also protect the sovereignty of Iraq and protect the borders, and not let Turkey to invade the Iraqi Kurdistan lands anymore. And our main project is raising awareness and amplify the voices of the villagers and tell the international community to what's happening on that people. And thanks for you, Matthias, to organizing this webinar. It is a part of raising awareness and amplifying the voice of the villagers, that what's happening. Actually, for us, what's important is people outside of Kurdistan know what's happening here and see what's happening here, and we want to tell the international community that the target of Turkey is not PKK. The target of Turkey is Kurdish civilian people in Iraqi Kurdistan. And we had meetings with the consulates and the international organizations about what's happening in Iraqi Kurdistan. Actually, some of them, they are listening, and some of them, they are responding, but we didn't see any actions, serious actions from them. For example, the Eastern countries, the Western countries should take a stance, and not, at least they can stop export the aids and the warheads to the Turkey and not support them anymore. Or even they can, for example, Turkey is a member of NATO. They can't debrief them. They can't debrief them. They can't tell them that what you are doing in Iraqi Kurdistan is not targeting any of your armed people. I mean PKK armed people. You are also targeting civilian people in Iraqi Kurdistan.
Yeah, thank you very much. That gives me the opportunity to bring in another question from the Q&A. So do you think that those companies who supplied for Bayraktar TB2 drones may be held responsible for killings? Perhaps, Chris, you can put that question down. Perhaps I would pass that to you later. But to connect again to Kamaran, I didn't mention the other wars where the Bayraktar was operating already. I mean, I'm very glad that we have like you from the battlefield that can explain a bit how these drone attacks work. But we could also have invited people from Turkish Kurdistan, for example, where, as I'm not mistaken, these attacks were starting. And then the Turkish drones were operating in Syria, I think in Idlib in 2016, that was starting more or less. And then, as most of you probably know, in Libya, supplying the so-called unity government. So there are many theaters where the Turkish drones are now operating, and this gives the company, of course, the great opportunity to market them as combat proven. So they were operating in war. There is the footage. Everybody knows the war was won. So no, like one war was won by drones. So thank you very much, Kamaran. Georg, to get back to you, you already explained a bit the situation in Armenia, perhaps you can drop a few more words about what happened to society after the war, and also to the military. So how is the military now reacting? So do they, or for the society, for example, do they want revenge? Do they demand drones as well? Does the military is now investing in drone technology? Or what actually seems a little bit more evident, invest in defense technology against drones. So could you briefly explain that a bit?
Yes, of course. So I think the first thing to be said is that it came as a shock for a lot of people, obviously. I mean, as Bahru said it, as you said it, drones are nothing new in the Artsakh conflict. We saw them in 2016 during what is known as the 4-day war, although I don't really agree with that name because it lasted far longer. It's just that it wasn't as intense as during the first 4 days. We saw them again during the interstate sort of clash. It wasn't really a conflict, just a clash back in July of 2020. And then the fiercest sort of expression in September of 2020. So, but on the other hand, it was on an unprecedented scale. So it came as a shock for a lot of people. It did cause quite a bit of anger in society, namely, why weren't we prepared for this? And that actually implies two things. Number one, why weren't we prepared for this from a defense standpoint? And then also, why didn't we have as many drones of the same quality that would be able to inflict the sort of damage that the drones used by Azerbaijan did, which I failed to mention in the sort of first round of questions. But I think it's important to understand that while they were being used by the Azerbaijani forces, these were mainly Israeli and Turkish produced. We've mentioned the names. I don't want to take up too much time. But it also needs to be understood that there were drones which were actually, they are Israeli, but they're produced in Azerbaijan because if I'm not mistaken, I'm very careful because I don't remember specifically, but I think it was IAI, which is the Israeli Aerospace Industries company, responsible for producing the Harop, the Harran. I think the Orbiter 3K is also of their production. I
think the Orbiter is another company. I think it's
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Again, as I said, I don't necessarily remember all of them, but the point is that they have a factory in Azerbaijan where they're able to produce technically Israeli drones, but they are locally produced in Azerbaijan, and so they were obviously used. And it is also my understanding that Azerbaijan is developing its own drones. To answer the second part of your question,
the military investment.
Yes. Obviously, as I said, it caused an incredible outcry in society, and up till now, in fact, we are still hearing calls for local production of drones. That we need to step up our game, and so on and so forth. So, while the army has been very quiet about it, whether it's the actual production of drones or defense systems. The only state institution to have spoken about the production of drones is the Ministry of High Tech, which is a relatively new ministry. It was sort of reformed in some sense following the 2018 Velvet Revolution in Armenia, which happened in April, May of 2018, which saw the current prime minister come to power. That ministry, on 2 separate occasions, has been talking about or showing videos that demonstrate the sort of power of Armenian-produced drones, including strike drones and loitering munitions. I can't really say anything about defense systems simply because neither the army nor the Ministry of Defense nor the Ministry of High Tech, which is in fact responsible for the sort of military industry in Armenia, have really spoken about it. Now, I don't know if that means that they're not really thinking in that direction, or whether maybe it's because they don't really want to open their cards towards Azerbaijan. I can't really say. But our main sort of, just so it's clear, that our main source of defense during the war was, were the Russian-produced, including in some cases, Soviet-produced anti-aircraft defense systems. But they proved, and I think it was also a sort of, I'm very careful here.
The Pantsir systems?
Yes, the Pantsir systems, including the Pantsir systems. Obviously, these were not the only ones. But, and I'm very careful not to touch on sensitive topics here. But I think that this war was also a very interesting, quote unquote, opportunity for Russia to evaluate the efficiency of its air defense systems and to maybe adapt them to this very new mode of warfare.
Yeah, so I mean, for those who are interested in, so obviously the defense systems were not up to date. So there are people, like there are military analysts who say like that the technology that was made for quick and high flying objects cannot attack low flying and slow flying drones, so that they have to be kind of refurbished, or easily spoken, that they kind of need an update. And of course, the defense technology, it's a big issue. So a last question for this last round to you. The reason why we organized this lecture is because in Germany we are now on the crossroads, so we can decide, that's we, like the politicians will decide, the government will decide to have armed drones or to not have armed drones. And some people say like, let's invest in defense technology. So there's also the argument that, for example, everybody is now investing in drones. So you will not win a war in future with drones, because your opponent will have drones as well. So we need to invest in defense technology. So there is a debate at the moment here. How do you see this this debate? So when we came across and invite you for this lecture, because Germany is starting to arm drones.
As far as Germany is concerned, I'll refrain from being, or from giving a sort of lengthy answer, because I'm going to be honest, I don't really follow up on German politics. But the feeling I'm getting, based on what I'm reading about a number of countries, including many European countries such as France, the UK, drawing lessons from this war, namely as far as drones and drone production is concerned. Just maybe a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago, The Guardian published an article about how the UK military had taken a keen interest in developing its own drones, and was benefiting from the lessons learned from the Artsakh war, from the approach taken by Azerbaijan. what I can say,
Turkey was very proud about that article, so that was quoted in many Turkish media.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, there you go. And while it pains me to say this, maybe they have a reason for doing it. But anyways, but as far as small countries like ours is concerned, you know, we are a small country, both physically and in the very geographical sense of the word, but also economically and so on. I wonder, I'm not a specialist, so I'm very, very careful here, but I do wonder whether we actually have the potential to rival countries like Turkey, for example, who have been doing this for quite some time now. Kamaran talked about it, how, you know, the history of Turkey and its military involvement goes back to the 90s. And I know for a fact that Turkey and Israel have been working on drone systems, I think, since the mid-2000s. Chris will either confirm or negate here, but, you know, they've been doing this for the last 15 years. I mean, we would need to be geniuses to catch up 15 years of time and suddenly be able to produce Israeli or Turkish quality drones. So I think that our power would lie in focusing instead on defense systems, by the way, which don't need to be expensive, you know, fancy looking, impressive looking, you know, air defense systems and whatnot, because these are obviously very expensive and very difficult to build, but instead on the sort of borderline portable defense systems that are now slowly gaining a share in the market, such as spoofers, such as buffers, and so on and so forth, which obviously, while still very much limited, are gaining traction and might be the solution, so to speak, for countries like Armenia.
Mm. Yeah, I would say that the German industry is also 5 or 8 years kind of back of the Turkish development. That's my perception. Perhaps Chris has a little bit different understanding on that. But before coming back to Chris, I would ask again Barus about Barus, are you there? I can't see you. Your microphone is off as well. How is it in Azerbaijan? Is the country now more expanding in drones or perhaps defense systems? So do you note anything there? Your microphone is off?
Yes.
No, it's done.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, there are different. Yes, there are. With Turkey, they continue their mutual military agreements, and I think that about Nagorno-Karabakh, the war is over, and the state of Azerbaijan, the government, repeats this statement from time to time that the war, for us, the war is over. And I think that they really think that it's over because there's an agreement between Azerbaijan and Russia, of course. It's Russians. First of all, we should mention that it's a role of Russia, and Russian presence in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Stepanakert. It's a guarantee that war will not be war or clashes. They will not start again. And despite the fact that, in my opinion, the presence of Russia has let's call it colonial spirit. But from one side, but from the other side, it's still productive, it's still good, because at least we don't have any blood in the region. But of course, Azerbaijan will continue its drone politics, let's say, just to expand its potential with Turkey, and Turkish influence in Azerbaijan reached its peak after the war, because basically Azerbaijan took the lands because of Turkey, and it's undeniable fact. And one more thing that I also would like to mention is that after the war in Azerbaijan, pro-Turkishness has reached also its peak, and I would also add that for example, right-wing populist discourses are also now are growing and really popular now, even more than before. So this is a consequence of war. And one more fact is that European actors, I would also say both EU and the United States, their influence now in Azerbaijan has been minimalized after the war.
That brings me to the fact, so that what you said about like right-wing movements that are boosted by the war, and we came across you, like your name. We invited you because you were one of the people who wrote an open letter, like an anti-war statement from Azerbaijan that was pretty short after the war started. I think in 3 or 4 days after your letter was published. You can find it in the Q&A section. It is linked there in an English version. If you want to read it in German, the newspaper Analyse and Kritik, they published it in the October edition. So how did this open letter that wanted to intervene like against the military invasion, how was this received, like in your country, in Azerbaijan, or internationally?
Yes, I remember those traumatic days, and for us it was, well, we just how we wrote this statement. We just created a group chat on Facebook with leftist people and my fellows, and we just realized that we need to write a statement, and we should raise our voices to show that there are people in Azerbaijan who associate themselves with Azerbaijan, or those who have Azerbaijani identities, that despite the fact that we are marginalized, we have this anti-war opinion, anti-war voice. And actually, after this statement, there's one more statement, more broad, which included not only leftists, but also different people with progressive liberal views, let's say liberal in a very broad sense. So basically how it was perceived, of course, extremely negative perception, I would say. We faced extremely negative perception in Azerbaijan, and because it was the first statement. The second statement was also perceived, of course, negatively, but because it was the first statement, it created a very negative emotions in ordinary people, in internet users, or it was a period of people as one, as I call it. It was a very totalitarian period of time during the war. Both the opposition, civil society, all of them supported the regime and the war that had been started by the regime. And of course, our statement faced with mainly negative perception in Azerbaijan, but there is also, of course, those who supported it, both from left side and both leftists and just ordinary people who was against the war, and we also received some support, but of course it was minimal back to that time. But now how I observe it, a lot of people understand that the war didn't change the situation in Azerbaijan, and the same old authoritarian regime, the same old problems are here, and those who support oppositioners who supported the war, they I would say that even if they openly don't acknowledge it, they still feel that it was disastrous, and if not disastrous, but at least it didn't bring the change, and it has made Aliyev and his regime even more powerful, and if the authoritarianism even more consolidated.
The president Aliyev.
And of course the Turkish influence and the fact that EU's influence is much lower than before. And going back to our statement, how has it perceived? Of course, we received a lot of support from from Armenia and from international community, for those who supported peace during the war, who are against the war, and yes, basically it was, yeah, I would say there are different kind of people who supported us from Armenian side, and those who are more open to communication, and those who acknowledge that we should live together in peace, and those who are less open to this. But still, there's different people, different opinions. It was fine to communicate with Armenian communities across the world. I personally received a lot of support from Armenians who live in the United States, and we talked. Of course, with some of them, I had different views, but the main things that it is the core of democracy. We may have different opinions, different worldviews, but the main things that we both are against drones, against any drone wars.
I mean, it's very great to have you two here from Azerbaijan and Armenia. So I met other Armenians and asked them, do you know people from Azerbaijan personally? So do you speak to them? And those who live abroad said yes. So yeah, I'm here in Berlin, and there are communities, but in the country, I think this contact, yeah, is very not so much. I would consider, and I think would you consider that? Would you describe Azerbaijan as a country that has a peace movement, or is it like very, very few activists that are concerned and acting on that?
Unfortunately, I would say that the last option, because there are really a few activists who stand for peace, and even now, of course, now when the war is over, it is a little bit. I wouldn't say that there are some peace activists, but I would consider those, in a broad sense, there are a lot of progressive people who understand that and I even myself, I don't consider myself as a activist. I am a political activist, and I understand that the future of democracy in Azerbaijan is questioned now. It is not but even like the chance that we will bring democracy now is in question. But at least we should work on on the fact that we should together in our in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Artsakh together, and reconciliation is necessary. So these voices are now. I hear a lot of voices for peace in Azerbaijan, and there are a lot of progressive people. Yes, they are visible. This is very important that they are visible. They are visible on the internet, on public. Yeah.
Yeah, one last question from the chat. Your audio is a bit strange, but I will wage another question. So it's coming from the Q&A. So what would you say? I asked the others as well. So as we invited you, because Germany is upon deciding, so they wanted to know your opinion as well. So how do you perceive the decision that we will have in Germany? That was the question. Did you get that? It's the question was about how. The question was about as we in Germany will face the decision to produce an armed drone, the so-called Eurodrone. In 2 weeks, there will probably be a German parliament decision on producing an armed drone. And there is also an outstanding decision to arm the existing one. So until the Eurodrone arrives in 8 years. So there are, let's say, 2 strings on arming drones, and nothing is decided yet. And the question in the chat is how do you see this debate as living in or being born in a country that started a war with drones?
Yeah, I would say it depends on how it will be used. But anyway, for me, drone wars are extremely dehumanizing. It's a war is about dehumanization anyway, but drone wars are even more dehumanizing. So of course it depends how Germany is gonna use it. For example, if it's it will be used against ISIS terrorists, or in some facts it could be used against others. I am not sure, but anyway, I am against drone wars, but in some exceptional cases it might be just justified. For example, if it's used against ISIS or Al Qaeda or other terrorists. But anyway, it's very contextual thing, and I think that Germany should consider itself more as an actor that brings peace and negotiations, rather than as an anti-terrorist actor like the United States.
Yeah, I mean, the debate is also, of course, like there are arguments pro and contra, and one of the arguments of us, for example, who are against arming drones, is like that the level of engagement will, of course, lower with drones, because the armies, they don't risk so much. So they will not lose a pilot if the drone is downed. For example, they can even cross enemy lines, so fly in enemy territory, for example. And also they will be keen to carry out these so-called drone strikes that the US was doing, was starting with, actually. And it was always portrayed as we are fighting against the terrorists, but under this umbrella they covered a wide range of operations. So the question here in the chat was also not, I think it was not addressing you, it was addressing all of us, but perhaps Chris can explain it. He's the last speaker of the last round now. So what is the meaning of a no? So if Germany would decide against armed drones, so how would it perceived by a community that you are part of, like NGOs who are dealing with drones? And we already, so Barus said it as well, so that Germany should rely more to be like, to have a stand of like more diplomatic efforts and not going into war. So what options are there to act against drones as a government?
Well, I mean, I think that's right, Matthias. There is this seeming inevitability. People are saying that, well, it's inevitable, particularly from this example of Turkey's use of drones in the recent conflict, that, you know, it's a game changer, that everybody needs drones now. Once they've seen how they either want to develop them or to acquire them from Israel or Turkey. But I think we need to draw a line. There needs to be resistance to that, because otherwise we keep going down the spiral that, you know, either we have drones or we have counter drones technology, defense systems, and then there is another technology to overcome the defense system, a drone to overcome the anti-drone defense systems, and it just goes on and on and on. And what we need, and what organizations like ourselves and others are trying to do, is to have international agreement on the proliferation and use of armed drones. And there have been discussions at the United Nations, and there is a broad general agreement in the US State Department to bring work forward on this. So NGOs and some countries need to stand out and say, this is not the way forward, that, you know, we need to have diplomatic and political solutions to conflicts rather than military solutions. And as some of our speakers have already said, drones are particularly dehumanizing. They particularly lower the threshold, and drones will mean simply more war. And as we've heard from the excellent contributions from our speakers, from Kamaran and Gorvak, that it's those civilians who pay the price, that it's ordinary soldiers who pay the price for these drone wars. And drones are transferring the cost of warfare from the armies, from the combatants onto civilians, and are keeping armies safe. So a no from Germany would be really inspiring, would be draw a line and help the movement worldwide to say that we need to draw a line and to stop the drone warfare, to stop the spiral of technological warfare, and to look at other means and methods. Of course, there will be lots of anger, and we've seen in Germany lots of anger about
of course. So the media was full of statements like so the first round in December. So actually, for those who are not aware of it, the German government consists of a coalition of social democrats and conservatives, and they decided, like in the background, they decided to say yes to arming the drones. And at the very last minute, more or less, the social democrats pull the brake and decided to delay the decision for the moment. And the newspapers were full of like conservatives, militarist people from the army who were complaining. Let me connect another question. So in the talk, we already mentioned several times that probably this will lead to an arms race, and you now mentioned it. No, the spiral. I think you named it the spiral of war. Or is there like an arms race? So what happened after the Nagorno-Karabakh war?
Well, there are certainly countries that now have looked at this, not just, as we've already said, small countries for who perhaps this kind of air power has been out of their economic reach, but because of these, not only the drones are much cheaper, but also apparently Turkey is willing to operate them on your behalf. So, you know, lots of countries will be looking at this now, and we've already seen, you know, an increasing number of countries wanting to acquire drones. When I started working on drones, there were only 3 countries that operated armed drones: Britain, United States, and Israel. Now there are somewhere between 20 and 30 countries armed with armed drones, and many more acquiring this. And this is what's so dangerous, is that more and more drones will mean more and more warfare. And I think the anger that you've seen in Germany will be dissipated, I think, if we have more evenings like this, where we hear testimony from Gilvac and Cameron about the actual impact of drones on the ground. And that's what's missing from the debate in Germany. That's what's missing from the debate in Europe, the voices of those on the ground. So that's what we have to amplify.
Yeah, so my question was more like this arms race. I mean, we can observe that was already before the Nagorno-Karabakh war, that, for example, the Ukraine decided to purchase Bayraktar TB2 drones. A first batch, I think, was consisted of 12 drones. By the way, we can explain also to the audience that a drone system, or like an unmanned aerial system, consists of the drones, the stations, mobile ground stations or fixed ground stations, and the satellite technology, to cut it very short. So this is an unmanned air system. And the Ukraine was, I think, the first country that the Turkish company, which, by the way, belongs to a son-in-law of Erdogan. So he developed it and produces and sells it. And so Turkey is now becoming a drone power. So I would describe a drone power as a country that produces drones, uses them, and sells them. And this is now also we can say about Turkey, but also about China. So the drone powers, US and Israel, I would leave UK beside now, because they don't produce and sell, so they buy the US drones. But anyway, now Turkey and China are competing as drone powers. And after the first batch in the Ukraine, they decided also they want like, I think 48 or something more drones, Bayraktar. So they really start to grow a fleet of armed drones. And the Ukraine is a country with an open territory conflict. So, no, like Azerbaijan and Armenia. And another country that is, so I think Qatar bought them already, but another country that is thinking about buying Turkish drones is Serbia. And the interesting thing is, Serbia already bought Chinese drones, or I'm not sure if they are only ordered or if they already arrived. But now the president, so after the war in Azakh, now the president was reflecting like, perhaps the Turkish drones are better because they are smaller and they are handy. They won a war kind of. And there was also a debate in the UK. No, we already mentioned that this Guardian article that was broadly received here in Europe. Yeah, but I mean also about the industry. I stated that the lecture. I stated that the industry in Europe is a bit back compared with the Turkish one. I said like 5 to 8 years. Would you agree on that?
I certainly think that Turkey is ahead in producing these small, very usable armed drones that will be used and looked on with envy by lots of smaller countries with militaries that want to have this air power, and so Turkey is very ahead in that. But other European powers like the UK and Italy and Germany are looking perhaps at the next generation of drones, the drones that are further ahead, much more autonomous,
that's
much
an interesting
more stealthy,
point.
Supersonic,
yeah.
Can travel faster and travel further. So it, as I said at the very beginning, when we use this term drone, it covers an awful lot of different systems. So we have to kind of be aware of that. So, and I think one of the problems, as you've mentioned, Serbia and Ukraine, and we've seen the example in Arsak, is how these systems impact on so-called frozen conflicts, where there is a fragile peace or where there is kind of simmering tension. And I think the introduction of these systems could spark and heat up these frozen conflicts, and I think that's a great danger.
Of course, I mean, in Serbia, it's the same situation. No, I mean, even I would not compare it with the Ukraine, but the war is not long ago that it ended. There was also a little bit discussing about the smaller drones, and to get back to a technical point, how can one down a drone? So we already talked about the air defense systems that were trying to down the large drones in the war. How does it work with medium-sized or smaller drones?
I mean, it depends a lot on how high the drone is flying, and what systems are on the ground. Certainly, drones have been shot down by RPGs, but they tend to not come that low. Or so drones, we regularly see drones shot down or crashed. Many drones crash because it's still very difficult, complicated technologically to fly these systems. And for all sorts of mechanical reasons,
let me briefly interrupt you and say, like, the Heron drones, which are the very large ones that the Bundeswehr is operating in the German army in Afghanistan. They started with 5 drones, all 5 crashed. I mean, they were replaced, of course, but they crashed 5 times.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so I think that speaks to that these systems are very fallible, that we're told how perfect they are, that they can deliver precision strikes, that they can operate, that they have this amazing technical ability. But these systems are very fallible and get things wrong. As we know, that, you know, the cameras are not that accurate, the intelligence is not that detailed, and so the technical perfection of these systems are often hyped up and overplayed, and we need to take that into account too.
Yeah, we are coming a little bit to the end of the lecture. So so for the audience, again, there is this Q&A section. So if you are quick, write down some questions, then we can post them to our guests. So there was one statement, for example, it would be very sad to see Germany as an interventionalist in international stage. Power of Germany come from its soft power and economic engine in the EU. We could discuss the economic engine as well, but I would agree. Of course, this is what we try to fight for. How, Chris? How would you consider that we can boost our fight? I mean, we, for example, actually. I think I will not make myself many friends if I say that also the peace movement in Germany is not the biggest. It had been, so it has been a very important history. Yeah, but is there any international networking? So, for example, in the UK, every 2 years there is this big arms fair, the DSE. And I saw many people like also drawing attention on drones. There was also, if I'm not mistaken, a drone action where they flew a drone into the fair, into the military fair. So what can we do like collectively?
Well, I think there are many things to do. One of them is to kind of, as I've said, you know, highlight the voices and make people realize what actually is happening on the ground. So. And you know, events like this are really useful, but we need to kind of have more of these. We also need to highlight that these systems have local bases and rely on locations quite close to us, either through the manufacture of components, and certainly we've heard about how the Canada have stopped supplying cameras to Turkey. The UK, there's also a company in the UK, Adair, that stopped supplying fuel pumps to Bayraktar when it was discovered that they were being used in the TB2. So, you know, there are possibilities there, but also, you know, Germany in particular is a good example of how important it is in terms of the base at Ramstein. That's obviously not to do with Germany acquiring its own drones, but it's very much involved through Ramstein in the US drone operations. And many of these systems rely on communications hubs around the world, and we need to highlight those and challenge those. And it's about educating people that drone warfare is not clean, bloodless, simple warfare, that, you know, that the real ordinary people, their livelihoods, the infrastructure of countries are damaged and destroyed by drone warfare, and we need to, you know, challenge that.
Technical point, I think we lost Barus, and Georg, you have to leave a bit earlier, you said, like I don't know, in case anybody wants to pose a question to Georg, that would be the very last opportunity, 5 minutes. And one last question to you, Chris. We were circling around that point already several times. Like you explained, like the automatization of drones and the networking with fighter jets, for example. That brings me to the point to explain a little bit more about the future combat air system. Perhaps when you registered for the lecture, you noticed that there will be 2 other lectures following, and the last one will be about this future combat air system. It is a system that France, Germany, and Italy want to develop until like in the next 20 years. And it consists of like a new fighter jet of the next generation, which is connected via a combat cloud with other carriers, manned and unmanned. And followed by drone swarms that can engage in case if the jet is attacked. So highly sophisticated systems. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And there is also a similar project in the UK, no? And now they are competing. I think it's called Tempest, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I mean, the original Future Combat Air System was between the UK and France. And then because of Brexit, France decided to work with Germany, and the UK is going alone. I suspect at some point they will come back together again, but there's lots of discussion about that. But the problem about both of these systems is that they introduce high degrees of autonomy and are taking the human out of the decision-making process about within combat and launching the use of armed force, and that's extremely dangerous. And we need to again challenge that direction. These things aren't inevitable. There is this whole industry that argues that this is inevitable. We just have to do this, but we don't. There are alternative ways.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would perhaps give all of the attendees a last opportunity to comment. So Georg, anyway, raised your hand.
Yeah, it was just to come back to the point you were making together with Chris about preventing the proliferation of drones and especially the servicing by European countries or countries of the Northern Hemisphere for these Turkish-produced drones. I would like to specify, and I don't know if a lot of people know about this, but during the war itself, because there are more Armenians outside Armenia than in Armenia proper, we have somewhere around 7 million in our diaspora across the world, and only about 3 million in Armenia itself. What happened is that obviously the war garnered sort of a sense of nationalism, sense of care for the country, for their compatriots, and one expression of that care was actually the protest movements that they staged in front of a number of companies, including the Canadian company whose name now escapes me, but that produces the cameras for the
Westcam.
Yes, thank you. They protested, and they were able to boycott and convince the company to stop selling their cameras to the Bayraktars. Now, whether that decision to stop will take on a sort of long-term nature is the flip side of the coin. But at least in that moment, they had vouched that they would be discontinuing their provision of cameras to the Bayraktar TB2 company. Just like they were able to do so with, I think, one US company, a couple of German ones. So the point is that we saw that in a very short amount of time, and with small groups of people simply gathering, in a very civilized, without any form of violence or any sort of aggression, simply in the most democratic and the most civilized way possible, would gather in front of the company building, hold up posters, write to them, lobby them through different companies or through different groups to convince them to stop providing equipment that eventually would serve to kill people. And we saw that in the case of a number of companies. They were more than happy to do it very quickly. They were very quick to come forward with statements that we are so sorry, we didn't know that our equipment is being used for lethal purposes, and so on and so forth. So sort of following up on my answer to your question, Matthias, about whether Germany will be joining this movement of arming itself with drones or not, while I think in one sense it is possibly inevitable, just because it will have to keep up with what's going on in the world. On the other hand, we see that it all too often takes very little, including lectures like these, for which I would personally like to say thank you very, very much for doing it. I think it's very important to raise awareness about all of the issues that we Armenians in Artsakh have faced, but also Kamaran in Iraq, and all of the other countries that are affected by this new type of warfare, and that you should definitely continue to make the effort, because it has very real repercussions for countries like ours.
Yeah, thank you for that statement. Before I will address the last question to Kamaran, so I will already say goodbye to Gevorg, because you will fade out now at a certain point. You have to leave earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to everyone who participated in the lecture, and I wish you best of luck on all the upcoming lectures. Thank you, Matthias.
It's not the end for the audience. Please stay for a moment. There is one other question in the chat that I would like to briefly answer. So before I will ask Kamaran how we can boost their fight in Iraq against the drone war, what we can do. But the question was, again, about the German companies that are producing parts for military drones. The question is not specified. This question was not addressing only the Turkish drones. We talked about that already. There is the German branch of MBDA, which is a rocket company. But the big drone suppliers in Germany, so the most important company at all is Airbus, in my opinion. Airbus is actually a bit bad in producing own drones, so that doesn't really get started, except the target drones. Target drones are for testing rockets. So these are drones that are just being shot down. This is their only purpose, to train the military, actually. So this is quite a big business that Airbus is making, but they are marketing the Israeli and Heron drones. So they are operating them in Afghanistan and Mali. And if I say operating, so Airbus is even flying them, not only when they have to repair and check them, but also in military missions. So Airbus is starting and landing the drones and passing over the steering wheel to the army when the drone reaches 300 feet. And so Airbus is developing the Eurodrone, which would be the European armed drone, which is a very important thing. So Airbus is the big player, and they also play a major role in the future combat air system that we were just mentioning. This network of manned and unmanned fighter jets and drone swarms. So Airbus is the company to address our protest to. About protest, so there will be the decision probably, it's not confirmed yet, but it seems there will be the 24th of March, there will be the decision to start producing the Eurodrone. The process will then take 8 years, but the decision will be now. Will Germany invest in a European armed drone? Even if Germany will not arm it themselves, this decision is pending, but Germany will pay the money to develop such an armed drone that can be used by each European country then. And there's also a protest already announced, the 24th of March, by a leftist organization, by a leftist network, which is called Interventionist Left. There will be probably others from the peace movement. So, Kamaran, to cut a long story short, this is what we are doing against our drones. What can we do against your drones? The drones that are affecting you.
Thanks for asking, dear Matthias. Actually, what we are doing here, we recently launched a campaign. It's called "Here Is Now, Stop the Bombing." So this campaign is held by the CPT and also in the collaboration with the civilian people that they have been impacted by the drones and by the bombardments. So what can you do is actually it's very important in Germany that if you tell your companies, your country, that Turkey is not the only responsible country that they are bombing our people in KRG. Also, all of the Western countries, UK as well, and United States and Canadian government, they all are responsible for what's happening here. So raising awareness is very important, and pushing the companies in Germany to not manufacturing or making or not buying not selling the equipment to the Turkey. It's very important. One thing is very important for us as CPT. We would love to ask you to follow our Facebook page. I will put it in the chat for all of you. You can follow the newses, and also it would be great as well if you participate in our campaign, and if you will write the letter for your consulates. I mean for example, German consulate, UK, British consulate, and Sweden consulate in Erbil, to write for them to follow up what's happening here and put pressure on Turkey to stop the bombardments. Also, our organization is based on the donations. It would be great if you donate for our organization, because we cannot continue without the help of the people. It can also be help to raising awareness and getting out the voice of the people in the villages in Iraqi Kurdistan. Before it would be my last speech, I don't want to avoid a question that it is in the Q&A.
There is no question.
There is a question. Yes.
No, there is no. Go ahead.
Yes. So someone asked about how US reacts to bombing of Kurdish people, which played key role in the defeat of ISIS. Actually, I want to say that if we are considering industrial of drones as a school, US is the headmaster of this school, and Turkey is a student of that school. So US cannot stop Turkey and tell them you should not using the drones, because they are already using these drones in bombing in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So if you want to ask Turkey to stop using the drones, in the same time we should ask the US and every Chinese and every single government that they are using drones in bombing people. It doesn't matter this people is Kurdish or who else. It means we are human being, and these drones are using in the against the human being, in the life of human beings. So we should continue our fight against the drones. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about that.
Thank you very much. So we are really like in time. It's 9 o'clock CET. We're gonna end that now. Thank you very, very much. So we lost Barus already. I think he didn't come back as far as I see on my small tiles here. And Georg had to leave already. So thank you, Chris. And thank you, Kamaran. Let's see how we can connect our struggles in future. I really have to address another thank you to Eva Karnowski and Sophie Kunze, who did the translation for 2 hours. Thank you very, very much. And for those of you who noted that we are a pure male panel, that's only my fault. I'm very glad that all of you participated. And I promise this year I will only invite women for any lecture that I co-organize. And also many thank you to Marius from the DFG-VK, which is an abbreviation for a German peace organization, who did all the techniques and who spent hours and hours with us testing again and again. It worked. Thank you, Marius. So
thank you.
I don't know if you want to catch up if you want to follow all our other lectures. There is one 14th of March about drone wars in Afghanistan, where also the Bundeswehr is operating and want to have armed drones then. And 18th of March at the same time, we are talking more about the future combat air system, and also what does this automatization of drones or unmanned weapons combined with such a system means for international law. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Tschüss.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So if there is any press here that wants to meet our speakers in a separate room, so please give us a sign and then we can connect you. Otherwise, send us an email. There is this website, German-speaking